here with the first in what I hope to be a series of videos in which I discuss my real passion, RPGs, and more specifically Dungeons and Dragons. Now, this video is going to be generally a discussion of my journey through the various editions of Dungeons and Dragons and what I got as a player and a DM out of each one of them. Now, I know this topic can be somewhat controversial in the Edition Wars style. That's not really what I'm intending, and to prevent that, I want to lay down a few just general rules, things to take note of as you watch this video. First of all, everything that I say in this video is just my opinion. I understand that I am one player amongst God knows how many, and what I'm going to be talking about is what I find to be true to me personally. This may not apply to you, and you may disagree with me, but ultimately, this is my experience. Number two, I understand that my experience is not shared by everybody, and there may be some disagreement. I fully welcome in the comments below anyone who wishes to debate and discuss the points that I'm about to raise in the coming video. However, this must be done in an adult and mature manner, or at least as adult as we can be talking about games. Failure to do that will get you banned without comment. I will have no insulting, no flame wars, anything like that. I'll just kick you right out the front door and won't spare another thought about it. So please keep it mature, fellas and ladies. I know I have a few female subscribers, because ultimately this is just to kind of share a hobby that I enjoy and to have fun with it. So I hope you guys enjoy it, and we'll go ahead and get started. I will be covering the editions chronologically in terms of when they came out, as opposed to my experience with them, just because it's easier to organize them that way. You'll understand as I get to things and discuss it. So let's go ahead and get into the first of the editions that I've experienced. Okay, and first comes AD&D First Edition. Now, while it is true that the first product ever bought for me for Dungeons & Dragons was a basic box set, and the first real edition I got into was 2nd Ed, First Edition comes first, so it gets top billing here. There was a lot of things I loved about First Edition. There's a lot of things that I think Second Edition did better, but you have to respect it for being the first in the advanced line of Dungeons and Dragons. And reading through the book, you can definitely tell it was designed for advanced players in mind. A lot of it can be somewhat confusing. There's an awful lot of tables, and certain things come across as clunky. Now, the one thing I will give it, and I still love this edition too for this day, are the adventures. And I know there's a lot of people that moan about the railroady Gygax style adventures where everyone dies, but you really got to look back at some of the best adventures in D&D history, and a lot of them come from First Edition. I mean, Against the Giants was a fantastic adventure. You're looking at the original Tomb of Horrors. I mean, yeah, they're meat grinders, but they really added a lot that is truly a backbone of what D&D has been for a long time. And I've played through most of those not even really as First Edition because they're so easily transferable to Second. In fact, as far as the editions of D&D, First Edition is one that I have not played significantly. There's a lot of stuff that I've obviously stolen. I mean, the Assassin's class, the Monk class here, I've taken into Second Edition games. Just about every adventure, as I said. And because the editions are so close together, it's very easy to make use of those facets of the game. And so I love that. I was amongst many, I'm sure, that hoped that every change of the editions would be as close as first to second. But the one thing I want to talk about as sort of the premier thing in second or in first edition was the Dungeons Master's Guide. That book is the most densely packed gaming manual I've ever seen in my life. There's so much to it, and really to this day, I haven't read another gaming text that I feel hits that same magic of just giving you everything you need plus a billion things you didn't realize you needed. And the other thing for me is I got my first copy of the DMG when I was pretty young. I started playing in '91 and got my first edition book shortly after I had started playing second. And one of the things I liked as a 12 or 13-year-old was reading these books and realizing that they weren't talking down to me. I don't think anybody would accuse Gary Gygax of talking down to anyone. In fact, I think I have benefited quite a bit from the writing style and having to learn and engage myself in that writing style to get the wealth of knowledge out of those books that I did. And I still think anybody, no matter what edition that you're running, go out and get yourself a copy of the first edition Game Master's Guide. There's so much good information there. You really need to sit down with it, read it, and just enjoy what that sort of old school gaming was all about. And I think there's a lot of stuff that you can take from that and apply to your games, even no matter what edition you're playing. As sort of a next note, and again, we're not going to spend too much time on first edition because I didn't really play it overly much. First edition did give birth to what may be one of my favorite monsters through all of D&D, and that's the Flump. For those of you that have never had the joy of the first edition Flump, they're basically flying spaghetti monsters. They're these big white disc monsters with dealy-bop eyes and tentacles and a mouth on the bottom with spikes. And it's strange because they look so monstrous, but they're lawful good. And I mean, the idea that they're sort of their higher-ups, they're monks, they have monasteries of flumps that are priests. And so I've using that in my current game, actually. There's a monastery of flumps near the campaign that the party has already had to go and consult with to earn the strange flump wisdom that they have. But the cool part is that they don't fly by magical powers. They literally inflate themselves and float by blowing air around. And so they're just such a strange monster that really only could have come about in first edition. And that gives you, I think, it's a good summation for me of the general feel of that edition. It was very strange. There was a lot of just bizarre monsters, but it was great fun. You could sit down and you could go hack and slash, you could role play, you could do what you needed to in just such a weird world that there's really nothing since that I think captures that same flavor. But all in all, I was a big fan of first edition. I would actually probably rate it as my second favorite of the 5 we're going to discuss here. More because I like stealing stuff from it. Some of the stuff was for instance, really clunky was the Bard in first edition. You had to make use of the dual classing rules, and you had to start as a fighter, then dual class to a thief for after you were a fighter for 10 levels maybe. You dual class to a thief for a little while, then you had to dual class to a druid. It was pretty crazy. I'm glad they just kind of made that a base class after a while. But I think even beyond the clunkiness and beyond the obviously aged writing, there are certain things that do not age well in this book. For instance, the random penalties for being female. Just your strength doesn't max out as well, just for being a woman. And I guess the argument has been made that oh, it's for realism because women are not as physically strong on average as men. And I'm like, all right, but you know what? At the end of the day, the reason why we're all sitting down here to play these games is to, at least at some means, to escape realism. And I think penalizing 51% of the population just for wanting to play females is definitely a sign of how dated this edition has gotten over time. And you do, the other thing that I don't think has translated super well is that there is kind of this unspoken animosity between the players and the DM in some of the writing, particularly in the inclusion of like tournament modules and stuff like that, which strangely enough are some of the more fun modules, but there's definitely this feel of DM versus player, and really, if the player can survive and think faster and be better than the DM, then that's what matters. That's what they win at. But other than that, I think there's a lot of things in here that you can take from your game, and I think there's a lot of benefit in reading this edition in a lot of ways to kind of see where we came from. So that's my general thoughts on first edition. All in all, big fan. So let's keep this train moving. Alright, and next on the docket is 2nd edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. Now, in the interest of being fair and open, this is the edition that I started with in 91, the old books, of course. But it is my absolute favorite edition of the game, bar none. It's the edition I'm still playing to this day. And one of the big reasons for that is that I think it took a lot of what made first edition work, and it made it explicitly modular. Now, first edition fans are going to be like, well, the first edition's books say use what you want and ignore the whatever. That may very well be true, but there was definitely a different tact taken to it in 2nd edition. If you look at the rules as they are presented and you ignore everything that is specifically in the book flagged as optional, it's a very, very simple game. Now, it does catch some flack for THAC0 haters, but let's be real, people. THAC0 is basic math. If you can't figure it out, you shouldn't be playing the game anyway. Go do something less mentally stressful like Tiddlywinks. And I don't care if I get hate on that. If you can't figure out THAC0, just go away. But on top of that skeletal, getting back to what I was talking about, on top of that skeletal framework of that basic game, there was just a multitude of options, both in the main player's handbook. I mean, everything from like proficiencies were optional, various weapon tables, weapon speeds, this, that, and the other, to the prevalence of what has come to be known as the Splat Book, the various race and class books. Again, all optional because they're not included in the core, but great ways to expand your game. And I loved that. I mean, this was during the height of my, as a kid, disposable income days, and I grabbed everything that I can get my hands on. And to be honest, I still do. In fact, one of the things on my bucket list is to own everything put out by TSR during the 2nd edition years, because they're just that great. On top of that, and this is going to be a strange thing that I'll talk up because I play on a homebrew world, the campaign settings were amazing. Pretty much without fail. I mean, there are some that are going to have lumps in them, various things that people don't like, but if you just look at the output during this time, and I understand for those of you who are RPG historians, don't get on my case, I fully understand that output and that product glut is a lot of what brought TSR crashing down, but you gotta admit, 2nd edition was an awesome time to be a player. There just seemed to be something new coming out all the time, and I still hold that the old campaign box sets were about the best value in gaming, bar none. I mean, back when I was playing this for $25-30, you could get a whole box set, maps, multiple books, monster manual pages, all sorts of stuff like that. Whereas now, I mean, $30 doesn't even get you a player's handbook anymore. So I definitely think it was. And yes, I know I may be looking at that through rose-colored glasses and ignoring inflation, but you know what? It's my video. I get to do that. But I love everything about the players, about the second edition. Do I think it's a perfect game? No, obviously not. But I think it is the game that was made the easiest to house rule because of the modular nature of its design. When half of the rules in your book already have the optional flag on there, it can very easily encourage a DM to add or subtract or change or make up new things to make the game run smoothly. And I mean, for instance, I have quite a few house rules that I use. I mean, I give humans a little bump because dual classing is not all it's cracked up to be. I ignore the racial level limits. I actually took a page from Hackmaster, which I'll talk about in a minute, where I give a little hit point kicker at first level, 10 extra hit points to everybody across the board. Just sort of, you're a player character, that's your special coolness, is what sets you apart from mortal men, that sort of thing. But I feel that the second edition allowed that to be encapsulated a little bit better, because it seems so welcoming. It's that modular nature helped you build the game you wanted to build, and I love that. Some of my particular bright spots in the second edition book or second edition were the blue books that came out. For those who aren't in the know during this time, the various splat books, as they called them, came out in different colors. Like the brown ones were basically for the players. They were the race books, the class books, whatever. There was a green line, which was different historical campaign settings. You could play in ancient Rome, the Renaissance, various different things. The Celts had one. But the blue books were designed as DM aids. And some of them were great. Monster Mythology is awesome. It's a book that's just about the gods of monsters and demi-humans. And I thought that was awesome. Again, even though I use my own homebrew that has my own gods, there's a lot of ideas. You can just mine that book for days, just for ideas. But probably my favorite, and the first blue book I got, was The Complete Guide to Villains. Now, these days, a book like that would probably just be like page after page of monsters, of villains, of templates, of blah, 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 blah. But the thing that I loved about this book so much, and I've read it so many times I've literally worn the cover, like not the cover totally off, but I've worn the words off the cover, is that it goes through kind of the logic of designing your villains, of what makes a good villain. And it's so good at encapsulating that even now, I mean, I've been playing Dungeons & Dragons for 20 plus years. I still go back and just read that book because there's so much truth to it that there's new things that you find all the time. And I thought it was awesome. I loved kits. I mean, the classes as they were presented were very basic, very archetypal, and they introduced this idea of kits where you would basically take this kind of add-on package. You might have a certain penalty, but you would get a certain bonus to give yourself the flavor if you wanted your fighter to be more like a Myrmidon was one of the big ones that everyone liked, sort of the best of the best mercenary fighters, that sort of thing. Your wizards could take like Amazonian, so you could be like this tribal wizard, and it would give you different penalties and benefits. And yeah, there were some that were not all balanced, but on the other hand, I don't necessarily think balance was a huge focus. Or more to the point, balance as a finite point in the game, I don't think was a huge bonus. I think the idea is that over the term of the campaign, things would be balanced because various people have the spotlight at this time or that time. One of the things that folks point out is how fighters started way up here and wizards started way down here, and then they kind of cross it at one point, and by end game, wizards are more powerful and the fighters are are weaker. I think that's an oversimplification in a lot of ways, but there is some truth to it. But if you look at that as a whole, that is a valid understanding of balance, in my opinion. And I like that. It lets everybody feel special at different times. And I think that's really what makes the party style of D&D work very, very well. So at the end of second edition, we got into the player's option stuff. And this is sort of the beginning of the end for me in many ways, because I think it was there where the ugly head of Munchkinism started to rear itself. The player's option books, the spells and magic and the combat and tactics ones aren't actually bad. There's a lot to steal from there. But the one that kind of made me really nervous and made me very afraid for the future of D&D was the first one that came out, was the skills and powers, where they basically turned it into a point buy system where you could basically build your own classes. And I played it and it was all right, but it was definitely, you were definitely expected to build the super uber characters and classes that were just ridiculous, and it kind of led to where things are going, and you'll see as I go on. So at the end of the second edition years, obviously TSR kind of collapsed under the weight of its own bloated product line and mismanagement. And they were bought up by Wizards of the Coast, who, for the last few years of Second Ed's life, continued to release solid products. If you look at a lot of those years, some great things came out. For instance, the spell compendiums, where they took literally every spell for the wizards and the priests that had ever been in the game, either in supplements, in Dragon Magazine, or anything, and they compiled them. Between that and the Encyclopedia Magica, which they did the same thing for the magic items, those are probably the most used books in my entire collection, and it was fantastic. But things were not to stay so joyous. Eventually, third edition came out, and the last thing I kind of want to talk about in this video is what happened to what I see as the true sort of spiritual inheritor of this, which was the game Hackmaster. After the third edition came out, nobody was using the rules for first and second editions, so Kenzer and Company licensed them. They're the company that does the Knights of the Dinner Table comic, if anyone is familiar. And they did a game called Hackmaster, which is the game that exists in their fictional comic universe. And I thought it was great. There were a lot of things that were amazing that I still use. Their character creation system is pretty solid. I don't use the quirks and flaws because a lot of them were just goofy and had to be put in there because there had to be so much parody for the license within the license. But they have like these character backstory tables, which we use all the time, like to flesh out the family of the adventure and stuff. And there's a lot of great stuff. And they kind of updated a lot of those old first edition modules and really kind of hackmasterized them, made them crazy. I played that for a long time after third edition came out, but eventually gave it up because it was very much set to be player versus GM. It was inherently pretty lethal, so it was a little harder to tell the kind of stories I wanted to in second ed. But all in all, in terms of second ed, definitely big thumbs up here. Let's go ahead and give it 2 thumbs up. Second edition is by far my favorite edition of the game. I am, if you want to call me a fanboy, call me a fanboy, because I will stand up to that every day of my life and twice on Sundays. But in part, I think my fanboyism and my love for second edition definitely colored what my thoughts are for third edition and turn that into a rather dark period in my gaming. And we'll go ahead and cover that in the next little segment here. Alright, and so came third edition. You will note that I do not have a copy of the third edition's handbook to hold up. And that's pretty telling of my feelings on it. When 3rd edition came out, I hated it. I felt like it was just the munchkinism that you started seeing at the very end of 2nd with the skills and powers just let off the freaking leash. And to a certain degree, I still feel that way. There's definitely a shift, sort of marketing-wise, I think, from 2nd edition to 3rd edition, where they went mostly for selling things to a gaming group in 1st edition, mainly through the DM, to selling things to players. Player splat books came out like crazy. And the rules I felt were much more hard codified and taken out of the hands of the DM. And admittedly, there are probably some who will argue, well, that's to keep the balance of the game and take things out of the DM's control so it's not arbitrary DM bullshit. And I'm sure everyone can pull out some example from their history of a DM totally abusing their power just to be a chode. But I think they went too far with it. I never really enjoyed... And let me say this, I did play 3.5. My hatred kept me warm, and Hackmaster kept me through 3.0, I think. But I did play through 3.5 for a better part of a year. Maybe a little more than a year. And I was unhappy every freaking minute of it. And I mean, we had some good campaigns. It was just such a struggle to play that game. It was overly complicated, and I think it rewarded system mastery way more than it needed to. Other thing I hated about it is, for the first time, the monsters and the players kind of played by the same rules. You had the same stats, you had the same feats and everything like that. And so the problem with that is, if you wanted to do anything except straight out of the monster manual, it took forever. I hated the amount of time it took. And to be honest, I mean, now I was in college at the time, and I had that time. If there's no way I could run a 3.5 game now. I mean, as an adult with 2 kids and other various interests, there's not enough hours in the day. Be honest, I don't even know that there's enough hours in the day for me to learn, like if I was starting fresh, to learn the 3.5 system, because it's, to be any good with it, it very much rewards system mastery. There's a lot of not fake choices, trap choices in your feats, and that sort of thing. The other thing that I thought was weird, that I noticed for the first time at that point, is the obsession with character builds. And this continued through at least 4th, where you had people, like, before the first game session, planning out their characters to level 20. And that drove me nuts. I hated the idea of and you had to. I mean, to get certain feat trees and stuff, you basically had to plan your character out from day one. And it's so weird. It just seems so static to me. Before you even know what it is your character's going to come up against, you already know where he's going for 20 levels, and I just didn't like it. The one thing that I could argue that was kind of okay was the skills. But again, I think, yeah, they were more realistic. They gave you more choices and the ability to make a character who's only a little good at something and that sort of thing. And that was all right. But I think it was just attached to a clunky system. And the other thing that made it worse is the open gaming license. And yeah, I know there are several people who will argue, oh, the open gaming licenses was great. It did X, Y, and Z for the industry. But all I remember it doing from the industry at the time, and again, your mileage may vary, is shitting out some of the worst bullcrap in any gaming system I've ever seen. It seemed like anybody who owned a word processor and a printer was putting out just these god-awful books. And maybe I didn't hit the good ones. I didn't. I mean, maybe there are some hidden gems there that I missed, but yeah, I thought they were garbage. There was a lot of garbage out there, and a lot of it I lay solely at 3.5. So needless to say, my feelings for the game have not changed in that time. And I've had folks tell me, "Oh, well, you need to play Pathfinder. It solves all the problems." No, it doesn't, because my problems with that game are fundamental. Like at its base, it annoys the shit out of me. And Pathfinder is based enough on 3.5 that I think the same things would annoy me. I mean, yeah, maybe they fixed some balance issues and tweaked with this and tweaked with that, but at its level, it was, well, it was terrible. And people can argue with me till they're blue in the face. Just be fully understanding in the fact that you will never change my opinion on this particular point. I hated 3.5. I hated 3, hated 3.5, and my hate keeps me warm to this day. And now I will argue that I haven't played Pathfinder, but again, I kind of treat them all as the same thing. Pathfinder is really like 3.75. And strangely enough, I was actually kind of looking forward when the rumors for 4th started to drop. And I was looking forward to getting into a new game and maybe having it be sort of what I was looking for again. And I was sure as hell ready to stop seeing 3.5 shit all over the place. But so next I did get into 4 for a little while. And we'll cover that in the next part of the video. So, after 3.5 and my brief fling with Hackmaster came 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons. Now, I'm sure those of you who managed to stick with me through the last part of this video where I was discussing 3.5 are just waiting for me to absolutely tear this game apart. The same, like, oh, it's too much like an MMO, blah, 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 blah. But I tell you, I think perhaps my experience with 4th edition is a little more nuanced than that. I will go ahead and say, when it first came out, I did buy up everything. I own just about everything that they did in 4th edition. It did help at the time that I was working at a bookstore, and so I was getting stupid discounts. But all right. So I guess I'll talk about the negatives first. Because I was disappointed. I was disappointed when it came out. I did run with it for a while. I ran, and actually, I probably, strangely enough, I may very well have played in more games of 4th edition than I have in any game except maybe 2nd. Because there were a lot of people trying to run it, and I was like, you know what, let me get in on that, see if it works any better from the other side of the table. But I'm going to go ahead and say the first thing that'll get people to turn the video off now. It's not D&D. Call it an MMO if you want to. Call it something else. Call it tabletop wargaming, whatever. But ultimately what it is it is something fundamentally different from Dungeons and Dragons. Yes, it has the name. It has the some of the iconic stuff in it, but they cram in so much additional stuff. And it's not what it is. Or it's not really what I wanted it to be. And ultimately, what I wanted it to be was Dungeons and Dragons, the game that I remember. Maybe cleaned up some of the problems with the rules from 2nd edition, something like that. And rather than coming back to what I felt were the roots of the game, I really felt like they had just created a different game and slapped the Dungeons and Dragons logo on it. And I was pretty angry. I was hoping that it would. I was hoping it would work. And for what I was looking for, it just didn't. Flat out. Now that being said, all my hang-ups out of the way, I think it's a good game. For what it is, the rules are tight. I mean, you get to make good characters. They kind of leveled everybody out. It's a very balanced game. I feel that for what is essentially slightly more than a tabletop skirmish miniatures game, it's solid. And a lot of the books were good for to make to that point. Now that being said, I think the flavor kind of sucked. I hated the points of light. I basically hated all of the stuff that they were trying to do to make it a role-playing game. As weird as that sounds, I think it was just the flavor. None of it worked for me, and it was so different than from what I was expecting and what I was wanting that it just didn't fit. But if you cut away all of that stuff, it's a good miniatures tabletop game. It's probably a pretty good one to introduce little kids to. And I mean, make the jokes about, dumbing it down all you want, but I mean, I could see myself introducing my own children to this maybe before AD&D. Maybe not. It may not be that it works out that way, but the rules definitely seem somewhat simpler and easier to grasp. Though I think that the level of tactics needed and the fact that you basically can't play the game without map and minis is a huge detriment to it. But they crapped out book after book after book. I gotta say, I don't know. It's strange because one of the things I loved about second edition was the number of splat books and stuff. But I found myself very much getting tired of fourth edition doing the same thing. And maybe it's because it was lacking in the fluff areas. It wasn't really giving me what I wanted theme and feel wise. That maybe had me less interested in them. But I'll be honest, if I hadn't been getting them for literally pennies on the dollar with discounts at my job, I probably wouldn't have bought hardly any of this stuff. But that being said, I do still have it. I haven't sold it or gotten rid of it. Not that I think there's a huge value in any of it with as fast as it went. But it's a game I could see myself actually breaking out and playing again. Mainly as a tabletop sort of war game. And as much as of the joke as it is, something very similar to how I would play like an MMO. Just let me run around and kill things and not think about it, and it'll be fun, and we'll do it. But the other thing that kind of annoyed me, and I should have brought it in here, were the powers. I think it's an interesting idea. Again, it's another one of those things I think they ultimately failed to do D&D when they did it. But the problem is basically to use these powers, you got to use cards. I mean, that's the only way to keep them straight if you're running any significant games. So my wife, Alicia, started making the cards up as we played. And we still have them there in the other room. It's a stack of freaking cards that's like this big from all of the cards that we used by all the players during those times. And it's just like, it's just another unwieldy, crazy mess. But all in all, that was sort of where that went. And then Rumble started with D&D Next. And I ultimately think what you'll see in my discussion of that really introduces a change in me as a player, and maybe a change in me as sort of whether or not I'm the audience anymore. But before D&D Next came back, I actually went back to second. So I've been playing second since then, and then the D&D Next playtests started coming out, and I guess we'll get into that in the next and possibly final part of this video. And so we come to D&D Next, or 5th edition, however you want to describe it. And what is, I'm sure, my last chance to piss everybody off in case there's anyone else actually watching this. I'll go ahead and get it up front in case you want to just turn the video off here. I have neither read nor played the completed version of D&D Next, or D&D 5th, whatever you want to call it. So if you feel like that's a problem for you to listen to what I have to say about it, feel free to turn off the video, do whatever you need to do. But I'm going to talk about D&D Next in a little bit of a different way than I talked about the other 4 editions, and because I ultimately think my interactions with the 5th edition say less about the edition and more about my change, the sort of my change in attitude as a player, a DM, and a role player. Now, one of the big things that was said when the playtests started coming out was that this was the edition that was going to draw from everything that had come before it. This was going to be the way to draw back in the grognards, the folks who were playing 1st and 2nd edition, the folks who were still playing 3.5, the ones that had gone to Pathfinder, and even the ones who were still playing 4. And it was painted as this giant unifying force. This would be the game that would bring everyone back together and make the D&D enjoying population a single thing again. Ultimately, for me at least, they failed. Utterly. And I would argue that it was a stupid aim to have anyway, and one that was ultimately never going to work. It had just been too long. Things had been too different, and the population, the D&D playing population, had split irrevocably. That there's not going to be a single game that will ever bring back the umbrella of all D&D players. Now, that being said, from everything that I've read, and I went through the playtests and did all that, and read through all that, the general feeling is that it's a good game, and it may very well be. But to do what they aimed to do, i.e. bring me as a player who enjoyed 2nd edition and has gone back to playing that and was playing that exclusively when this book came out, to bring me back into the money spending fold again. And it didn't happen. I mean, needless to say, I continue to run a 2nd ed game, and I have exactly 0 interest in purchasing any of the 5th edition stuff. Now, some of you may take that as me shitting on 5th edition. That's not the aim. I'm sure it was put together with all the best intentions, but the problem is it's a small lever trying to move a mountain. And it's trying to do it in a completely different world, I think. And I'm not even talking about in the game now. For those of us who are older D&D players, many of us are adults with families and different different levels of responsibility, and if my choice is between continuing to play with my second edition stuff and occasionally buying a cheap book off eBay to continue my collection, or spending over $100 just for the base books to learn a whole new game, and to one that I don't even necessarily think is that interesting. I mean, the advantage disadvantage system, the art, frankly, is just, I mean, it all looks pretty uninspiring to me. It's just too, I don't want to say the word modern, but that's kind of what comes across in my opinion. Just from the look of the books, I mean, I've looked at reviews of them, I've seen the books in the stores. There's just nothing that jumps out and says, spend money on me. And I think that's ultimately a change in me as a gamer. It's not anything wrong with the system. I mean, it may very well be an excellent system. Who knows? If I ever brought myself to buy it, I may enjoy it. And so that's not really what I'm talking about. I'm discussing more my experience and what I'm looking for in a game. And what I'm looking for in the game is something familiar. I think I've been burned twice by Dungeons & Dragons in terms of 3rd and 3rd edition and 4th edition moving away from what I feel the game is, and it's not really what I'm looking for anymore. And so I don't know that there's any way that they can win back someone like me. And I guess I wouldn't be harping on this so much in this video if that wasn't sort of their expressed aim from design with this particular game. They were expecting to kind of bring back the thronging masses, and who knows? Maybe a lot of folks do. Maybe they did get a shot in the arm. Maybe it's doing well for them. But for me, it was sort of the last push into apathy. Like, I no longer feel like I need the newest, hottest thing. I'm over that. I for those of you who have watched some of my videos on Warhammer, maybe I've redirected it to that. No telling. But I'm at a point now where I can find players and I can teach them 2nd edition, and God knows I have enough books to do it. And so the group I've got is a group of, I mean, 2 long-time role players, and 3 relatively newbies. But 2nd Ed meets all of our needs for that. And so it comes to a very strange thing for me, in that the nicest thing I can say after all of the play tests and what I know about 5th edition, the nicest thing I can say about it is that it doesn't piss me off. And compared to 3.5, I mean, it's definitely better. I mean, hell, unplayed, I rank it higher than 3.5, which is absolutely the worst version of this game that's ever been done. In my humble opinion. Flame me if you want. But it ultimately, I feel it failed, at least for me, in its stated goals, which was to bring me back to the fold. And it didn't do that. So that's kind of where I sit right now. I feel like I am, I mean, call me a grognard if you will. I definitely am a member of the old guard, and 2nd edition is probably the version of D&D I will play until I die. I mean, who knows? Maybe in 3.5 years when 6th edition comes out, maybe they'll do something different that draws my attention. But for that to happen, it's going to have to be freaking amazing, because I'm so disconnected with sort of modern RPGs. So all in all, that is my journey through D&D. I felt like this was a very important video to do first. Hopefully somebody has watched it to the end. Because I think this feeling informs a lot of what I think about the game, and if I'm going to continue doing these RPG talks and talking about things, I think it's important to know where I'm coming from. And a lot of the videos that are going to be coming soon will be either discussions of specifically cool books that I've used, or fun stories from my years of gaming. Lots of different stuff. So hopefully it'll be enjoyable. For those of you who are normally my Warhammer subscribers, don't fret. I'm not cutting down on any of that content. This is just something else to share a different facet of me with you guys, and I hope you enjoy it. Other than that, we will catch you next time. Thank you guys for watching and letting me branch out a little bit.